Betrayal costs far more than a broken heart inside Cook County Courtroom 1904. Theodore Prescott smirked, entirely confident his ironclad prenuptial agreement would leave his wife grasping at pennies. He thought he possessed all the leverage and wealth. He was catastrophically wrong. Prepare for a divorce trial that shattered everything. Dust motes danced in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the Cook County Domestic Relations Court. It was a Tuesday morning, the air thick with the scent of polished mahogany and shattered promises. At the petitioner's table sat Theodore Prescott, a man whose tailored Italian navy suit and perfectly styled silver hair screamed old money, even though he had clawed his way up through aggressive real estate acquisitions over the last decade. Beside him was Silas Montgomery, a senior partner at Montgomery, Hayes and Associates, a law firm renowned across Illinois for financially eviscerating spouses in high-stakes divorces. Theodore radiated an aura of bored impatience. To him, this trial was a mere formality, a brief administrative hurdle before he could finalize his freedom and move on with a 26-year-old former pageant queen he had already installed in a Gold Coast penthouse. He glanced across the aisle. At the respondent's table sat Clara Prescott. She wore a simple, unadorned charcoal grey blazer over a white blouse. Her demeanor was maddeningly calm. For 12 years, Clara had been the supportive wife. She had smiled at the corporate galas, hosted the endless networking dinners, and stayed quietly in the background while Theodore built Prescott Equities into a regional powerhouse. When Theodore had presented her with divorce papers 3 months prior, alongside a demand that she vacate their primary residence within 14 days, she hadn't screamed. She hadn't thrown a glass. She had simply nodded, packed 2 suitcases, and left. "All rise," the bailiff barked, shattering the tense silence. The Honorable Judge Madeline Croft presiding. Judge Croft, a woman with piercing brown eyes and a reputation for zero tolerance regarding courtroom theatrics, took her seat at the bench. "Be seated. We are here on the matter of Prescott versus Prescott. Counsel, are we ready for opening statements?" "Ready, Your Honor," Silas Montgomery announced, his voice booming with practiced authority. He stood, buttoning his jacket, and approached the podium. "Your Honor, this case is exceptionally straightforward. My client, Mr. Theodore Prescott, is a self-made man. 12 years ago, prior to his marriage to Clara, the parties executed a comprehensive prenuptial agreement drafted by independent counsel. Exhibit A in your binder. The terms are unambiguous. In the event of a dissolution of marriage, Mrs. Prescott is entitled to a one-time lump sum payment of $50,000, and she waives all rights to spousal support, maintenance, and any claim to the assets of Prescott Equities or its subsidiaries." Silas paused, letting the meager sum hang in the air to emphasize its finality. Mrs. Prescott entered this marriage with a checking account containing less than $2,000 and a degree in art history. During the marriage, she did not work outside the home. She did not contribute capital to my client's ventures. She enjoyed a life of extraordinary luxury, funded entirely by my client's labor. Now, her counsel has requested this trial to challenge the validity of that agreement and seek an equitable division of assets. This is nothing more than a desperate, frivolous attempt to circumvent a legally binding contract. We ask the court to uphold the prenuptial agreement in its entirety and finalize the dissolution. Theodore leaned back in his leather chair, a faint, victorious smile playing on his lips. It was a masterclass in legal dismissal. Silas returned to his seat, giving Theodore a subtle, reassuring nod. "Ms. Reyes," Judge Croft prompted, looking over her reading glasses at Clara's attorney. Evelyn Reyes of the Reyes Law Group was not a flashy litigator. She was meticulous, soft-spoken, and terrifyingly precise. She stood up, organizing a small stack of manila folders. "Thank you, Your Honor," Evelyn began, her voice even and calm. "Opposing counsel is correct on one point. There is a prenuptial agreement. We are not here today to contest the validity of that agreement. We concede that the assets of Prescott Equities and all wealth generated directly from it are shielded by the contract signed 12 years ago." A collective ripple of confusion washed over the courtroom. Even Judge Croft raised a skeptical eyebrow. Theodore looked at his lawyer, his smirk faltering for a fraction of a second. If they weren't contesting the prenup, why had they demanded a full trial? Why the extensive discovery requests that had annoyed Theodore's accounting team for months? However, Evelyn continued, stepping out from behind the podium and walking closer to the bench, the prenuptial agreement explicitly protects the separate property of Theodore Prescott. It also explicitly states that any assets created, funded, or developed independently by Clara Prescott during the marriage, without the use of Theodore's funds, remain exclusively hers. Furthermore, any assets co-mingled or hidden by the petitioner using joint marital resources not protected by the agreement are subject to equitable distribution. "Objection, Your Honor," Silas interrupted, standing up. "Relevance. Mrs. Prescott has no independent assets of note. Her financial disclosures list a personal checking account with $4,200 and a 2015 Subaru Outback. We are wasting the court's time." "Overruled, Mr. Montgomery," Judge Croft stated flatly. "I will allow Ms. Reyes to lay out her case." "Proceed, counsel." "Thank you, Your Honor," Evelyn said, returning to her table and picking up a thick, black binder. "We will demonstrate over the course of this trial that Mr. Prescott is under a grave misconception about his wife's activities over the last decade. He believed she was merely a silent partner, spending her days at country clubs and charity luncheons. In reality, Clara Prescott was quietly building an empire of her own, one that, according to the very prenuptial agreement Mr. Prescott relies upon, he has absolutely no claim to. And more importantly, we will prove that Mr. Prescott inadvertently tied his own lifeblood to her creations. We are not asking for a piece of his pie, Your Honor. We are here to show the court that Clara owns the bakery." Theodore let out a scoffing laugh, shaking his head. Clara didn't even look at him. She simply stared straight ahead, her hands folded neatly in her lap, the picture of perfect composure. The first 2 days of the trial were a grueling exercise in financial forensics. Silas Montgomery did everything in his power to paint a picture of Theodore as the sole economic engine of the household. He paraded a line of forensic accountants from prestigious firms who testified to the valuation of Prescott Equities, a staggering $85 million, and confirmed that the corporate veil was intact, fully protected by the 12-year-old prenup. Through it all, Clara's lawyer, Evelyn Reyes, cross-examined the witnesses with mundane, seemingly pointless questions. She asked about the software systems Prescott Equities used to manage their massive portfolio of commercial properties. She asked about their logistical supply chains for building materials. Silas objected frequently, citing irrelevance, but Evelyn managed to tie every question back to the general operational expenses of Theodore's company. On the morning of the third day, the dynamic shifted. It was Clara's turn to present her case. "Call your first witness, Miss Reyes," Judge Croft instructed. "I call Clara Prescott to the stand," Evelyn said. Clara walked to the witness stand, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down, smoothing the skirt of her navy dress. "Mrs. Prescott," Evelyn began, approaching with an exhibit folder. "Can you describe your daily routine during the years 2018 to 2022? "I maintained the household," Clara answered, her voice clear and projecting well across the quiet room. I managed the domestic staff, organized philanthropic events for my husband's company, and ensured his personal life ran smoothly so he could focus on his real estate acquisitions. Silas rolled his eyes visibly, leaning over to whisper a joke to Theodore. "And what did you do with your free time, Mrs. Prescott, when your husband was away on business trips or working late?" "I coded," Clara said simply. Theodore stopped whispering. He frowned, looking at his wife. "You coded?" Evelyn asked, feigning mild surprise. "Could you elaborate for the court?" "My undergraduate degree was in art history." "Yes," Clara explained, looking directly at Judge Croft. "But my minor was in computer science. During the marriage, I noticed that Theodore's property managers were constantly complaining about the inefficiencies in their tenant management and vendor payment systems. They were using outdated, fragmented software. It was costing his company millions in delayed payments and inefficient maintenance scheduling. So, what did you do? In 2018, using an old laptop and free open-source compilers, I began writing a proprietary property management algorithm. I called it Nexus. It was designed to integrate predictive maintenance, automated vendor bidding, and real-time tenant communication into one seamless platform. Evelyn walked over to the clerk and handed over a stack of documents. "Your Honor, I am entering Exhibit 42 into evidence. These are the corporate formation documents for an entity named Cobalt Innovations, LLC, registered in Delaware in 2019. She turned back to Clara. "Mrs. Prescott, who is the sole managing member and 100% equity owner of Cobalt Innovations, LLC. "I am," Clara replied. "And did you use any of Theodore Prescott's money to form this company or develop the software?" "No. I used a $200 birthday gift from my mother to pay the state filing fees. Everything else was my own intellectual labor." "Objection," Silas Montgomery shouted, standing up quickly. "This is a blind side, Your Honor. Plaintiff's counsel never disclosed the valuation of this Cobalt Innovations during discovery." "Your Honor," Evelyn shot back smoothly. "We provided the tax returns for Cobalt Innovations during discovery. If opposing counsel failed to investigate a zero-revenue startup listed on Schedule C of my client's personal, separate tax return, that is an oversight on their part, not a failure to disclose on ours." Judge Croft flipped through the binder in front of her, her eyes scanning the pages. "The court records show the disclosures were made, Mr. Montgomery. Overruled. You may proceed, Ms. Reyes." Silas slowly sat down, his face flushing a dull red. Theodore grabbed his lawyer's forearm, his grip tight. "What is she talking about?" Theodore hissed. "What the hell is Cobalt Innovations?" "Keep your voice down," Silas muttered, rapidly flipping through his own notes. "Mrs. Prescott," Evelyn continued, pacing slowly. "You mentioned Cobalt Innovations was a zero-revenue startup. Why was that?" "Because I didn't sell the software to the public," Clara stated. "I beta-tested it. In 2020, I offered a free, perpetual, non-transferable beta license to a mid-sized property management firm to see if it worked in the real world." "And what was the name of that firm?" Clara finally looked directly at Theodore. The calm demeanor remained, but a sharp, undeniable glint of steel had appeared in her eyes. "Prescott Equities," she said. A heavy silence dropped over the courtroom, the kind of silence that precedes a massive structural collapse. Evelyn approached the witness stand again. "To be clear, Mrs. Prescott, you are testifying that your husband's $85 million real estate empire currently runs entirely on software owned exclusively by you?" "Yes," Clara said. Theodore's chief operations officer loved the beta version so much, he integrated it across their entire portfolio. Theodore signed off on the adoption of the software himself, assuming it was a cheap, third-party vendor solution. He never bothered to read the licensing agreement his COO put on his desk. "Your Honor, this is preposterous," Silas sputtered, rising again. "Let me finish, counsel," Evelyn said sharply, her soft-spoken nature vanishing. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, Exhibit 45 is the licensing agreement signed by Theodore Prescott in his capacity as CEO of Prescott Equities. As per the terms of that agreement, the free beta period expired precisely 30 days after Mr. Prescott filed for divorce. Upon expiration, the standard commercial licensing fees triggered retroactively for all properties managed under the Nexus system." Evelyn walked back to her table and picked up a single sheet of paper, holding it up. "We are not asking for a division of his real estate, Your Honor. We are submitting a bill for services rendered by Cobalt Innovations, LLC, to Prescott Equities. A bill that, according to the forensic accounting of his own company's reliance on the software, amounts to a crippling $12 million in back licensing fees, plus ongoing royalties." Theodore's face drained of all color. He looked at the sheet of paper in Evelyn's hand, then at Clara, realizing for the first time in 12 years that the woman he thought was a simple ornament was, in fact, the architect of his potential ruin. Panic is a silent predator. It did not hit Theodore Prescott all at once. Rather, it seeped into his bones during the agonizing 15-minute recess Judge Croft called immediately following Clara's explosive revelation. Inside the cramped, oak-paneled consultation room adjacent to courtroom 1904, the atmosphere was suffocating. Theodore paced like a caged tiger, his meticulously styled silver hair now disheveled as he ran his hands through it repeatedly. Silas Montgomery, the silver-tongued legal shark who had confidently promised a swift victory, was furiously scrolling through digital files on his tablet, his face pale and slick with a thin layer of cold sweat. "How did you not know?" Theodore roared, slamming his fist against the laminate table. "You are paid $700 an hour to know every single financial detail, Silas. How did a $12 million liability slip past your entire team of forensic accountants?" "Because it wasn't a liability until you filed for divorce, Theodore," Silas shot back, his professional veneer cracking. The entity, Cobalt Innovations, was listed on her disclosures as a zero-value asset. There were no cash flows, no dividends, no K1s showing income. It looked like a defunct hobby, LLC. We had no reason to subpoena the client list of a dormant company, especially when the prenuptial agreement explicitly walled off her separate business ventures. "She set a trap," Theodore hissed, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. "For years, she sat across from me at dinner, pouring wine, smiling, while she slowly wrapped a garrote around the neck of my company. We are not dead yet," Silas said, straightening his tie and closing the tablet. "We just need to invalidate the licensing contract. We argue fraud. We argue breach of marital fiduciary duty. We argue that she used marital assets to build the software. If we can prove she used your money to build Nexus, we can pierce the veil of Cobalt Innovations and claim the intellectual property belongs to the marriage, which means it falls under the purview of Prescott Equities." When court resumed, Silas came out swinging. His first move was to call Harrison Gallagher, the chief operations officer of Prescott Equities, to the stand. Harrison was a nervous, balding man in his late 40s who looked entirely out of place in a courtroom. He took the oath with a trembling hand. "Mr. Gallagher," Silas began, pacing aggressively in front of the jury box, "you are the individual who integrated this Nexus software into my client's company, correct?" "Yes, sir," Harrison replied, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Did you know that the vendor, Cobalt Innovations, was owned by your boss's wife?" "Absolutely not," Harrison stammered. "I found the software on a niche commercial real estate forum. The developer was listed only as CP admin. I downloaded the free trial and it was miraculous. Our legacy systems were failing. We were losing track of vendor invoices. Nexus automated everything. When the trial period was ending, I requested a perpetual beta license from the developer, and they granted it in exchange for us providing stress test data." "And did Mr. Prescott review this contract?" "He signed it," Harrison said defensively. "But he signs hundreds of vendor agreements a month. He trusted my operational judgment." "No further questions," Silas snapped, turning back to his table with a smug look. He believed he had established that Clara had deceptively bypassed her husband. Evelyn Reyes stood up, her expression unreadable. She walked slowly to the podium. "Mr. Gallagher, during your communication with ESECP admin, did the developer ever lie to you about their identity?" "No," Harrison admitted. "I never asked for a name. I just cared about the code." "And did this software benefit Prescott Equities?" Harrison let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Benefit? It saved us. In the first 18 months of implementation, Nexus reduced our operational overhead by 22%. It automated our rent collection pipelines, which boosted our on-time payments by 40%. Honestly, without Nexus, our expansion into the commercial warehousing sector last year would have financially collapsed." Theodore slumped in his chair. His own COO had just testified under oath that Clara's software was the undisputed backbone of his $85 million valuation. "Thank you, Mr. Gallagher," Evelyn said. "No further questions." Silas, desperate to regain control, recalled Clara to the stand. He decided to go for the throat, attempting to prove the software was a marital asset. "Mrs. Prescott," Silas sneered, leaning heavily on the podium, "you claim you built this empire with a $200 gift. But you lived in my client's mansion. You ate the food he bought. You used the electricity he paid for. You used his high-speed internet to research, download, and compile this code. By definition, you used marital resources to fund Cobalt Innovations." Clara smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in 3 days, and it sent a visible chill down Theodore's spine. "I anticipated this line of questioning, Mr. Montgomery," Clara said smoothly. She turned her attention to Judge Croft. "Your Honor, in my supplementary evidence binder, Exhibit 50 through 58. Evelyn swiftly handed the judge and Silas the corresponding documents. "What are we looking at, Mrs. Prescott?" Judge Croft asked, her tone laced with genuine intrigue. "Those are receipts, Your Honor," Clara explained. "Before I began coding Nexus, I read the prenuptial agreement Theodore's lawyers forced me to sign 12 years ago. I noted the clause that stated any commingling of marital assets into a separate business would invalidate the separate nature of that business. Therefore, I was meticulous." Clara pointed to the first document. "Exhibit 50 is the receipt for my laptop, purchased refurbished 3 years prior to my marriage. Exhibit 51 is the billing statement for a dedicated, encrypted mobile hotspot. I never connected my work computer to the mansion's Wi-Fi. I paid for that hotspot using the separate checking account I brought into the marriage. Exhibit 52 through 58 are the server hosting bills, paid entirely by the small amount of interest accrued in that same separate checking account." Silas stared at the papers, his mouth slightly open. He was looking at airtight, irrefutable proof of total financial segregation. "Furthermore," Clara continued, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. The electricity argument is legally obsolete. In the precedent-setting case of Holden versus Holden, in this very state, the appellate court ruled that incidental household utilities do not constitute a capital investment in a separate corporate entity. Judge Croft nodded slowly, clearly impressed. The witness is correct, Mr. Montgomery. The commingling argument is entirely without merit. Cobalt Innovations is a fiercely independent asset. Move on. The trial entered its final afternoon. The air in the courtroom was thick with the scent of impending doom for the petitioner. Theodore looked physically ill. The 26-year-old former pageant queen had stopped attending the proceedings on the second day, likely sensing the incoming financial slaughter. Evelyn Reyes stood for her closing arguments, but instead of walking to the podium, she approached Theodore's table directly. "Your Honor, we are at an impasse," Evelyn stated, her voice sharp and authoritative. "My client, Cobalt Innovations, possesses a legally binding contract signed by Theodore Prescott. As of today, Prescott Equities is in breach of that contract to the tune of $12,400,000 in retroactive licensing fees, but that is merely the past." Evelyn turned to face the gallery, then pivoted back to Theodore. Clause 14. Subsection B of the Nexus End User License Agreement, which Mr. Prescott signed, contains a standard software industry kill switch provision. If an enterprise user defaults on payment for more than 90 days following a triggering event, in this case, the expiration of the beta period, the developer retains the right to suspend all cloud services and revoke data access to protect its intellectual property. "You wouldn't dare," Theodore whispered, his voice trembling. "Objection," Silas yelled, jumping to his feet. "This is extortion, Your Honor." "It is standard B2B contract enforcement, Your Honor," Evelyn countered seamlessly. "If Prescott Equities does not settle its vendor debts, Cobalt Innovations will remotely deactivate the Nexus servers at midnight tonight." A collective gasp echoed from the few law clerks and reporters sitting in the gallery. Harrison Gallagher, still sitting in the front row, buried his face in his hands. "If Nexus goes dark," Evelyn explained methodically to the judge, "every electronic door lock on every commercial building owned by Mr. Prescott will freeze. His tenants, which include regional hospitals and national logistics hubs, will be locked out. The automated climate control systems will fail. The rent processing portals will shut down. Prescott Equities will be hit with hundreds of millions of dollars in breach of contract lawsuits from its own tenants by tomorrow morning." Judge Croft looked down at Theodore. "Mr. Prescott, it appears your company's operational survival is entirely dependent on your wife's intellectual property. What is your proposed resolution?" Theodore stood up on shaking legs. He looked at Clara, his eyes pleading for the first time in over a decade. The arrogance was gone, entirely vaporized by the sheer magnitude of her strategic brilliance. "I will pay the $12 million, Theodore choked out. "We can liquidate the mutual funds. We can leverage the Gold Coast penthouse. I will write the check today." Clara stood up, smoothing her charcoal blazer. "I don't want the $12 million, Theodore." The courtroom fell dead silent. Even Judge Croft leaned forward, captivated by the raw human drama unfolding before her bench. "You don't?" Theodore asked, a flicker of desperate hope igniting in his chest. "You'll forgive the debt?" "I will forgive the retroactive debt," Clara said, her voice echoing with absolute authority. "And I will grant Prescott Equities a perpetual, irrevocable, enterprise tier license to the Nexus software, ensuring your operations never experience a single second of downtime." "In exchange for what?" Silas asked suspiciously, his eyes narrowing. "In exchange for equity," Clara stated coldly. "I do not want to bankrupt Prescott Equities. I built the software that made it a titan. I have no desire to see my hard work destroyed by your financial mismanagement. But I will no longer be a silent partner, and I will not be discarded with $50,000. Clara stepped out from behind her table, looking Theodore dead in the eye. My settlement offer is this. Cobalt Innovations will forgive the vendor debt and secure your servers forever, in exchange for 51% of the Class A voting shares of Prescott Equities. You will transfer majority control of the board to me. You can retain your title as CEO, but you will report to me. I will own the company. Theodore staggered backward, as if he had been physically struck. You're out of your mind. 51%? That's $43 million in equity. The prenup protects your assets from a divorce settlement, Evelyn interrupted flawlessly. This is not a divorce settlement, Mr. Prescott. This is a corporate debt restructuring and a vendor acquisition negotiation. The family court is merely the venue. You can either sign over the voting shares to Cobalt Innovations to satisfy your corporate debts, or you can refuse, and we flip the server switch at midnight. Your choice. Theodore looked at Silas. Silas looked away, completely out of ammunition. There were no legal maneuvers left. The contract was bulletproof. The technical leverage was absolute. Clara had spent years quietly weaving a web so tight, so perfectly constructed, that Theodore had enthusiastically locked himself inside it. "Do we have an agreement, Mr. Prescott?" Judge Croft asked, her tone indicating she had little patience left for his hesitation. Theodore stared at the woman he had severely underestimated for 12 years. He had thought her quietness was weakness. He had thought her obedience was stupidity. He realized, far too late, that she hadn't been standing in his shadow. She had been studying his blueprints, finding the structural flaws, and quietly buying the ground beneath his feet. With a trembling hand, Theodore reached into his tailored Italian suit, pulled out his platinum fountain pen, and looked at Evelyn Reyes. "Draft the transfer papers," Theodore whispered, his voice cracking. "I agree to the terms." Clara Prescott did not gloat. She did not cheer. She simply nodded politely to the judge, picked up her single manila folder, and walked out of courtroom 1904. She had walked in facing eviction and destitution. She walked out as the undisputed sovereign of an $85 million empire. Did Clara go too far, or did Theodore get exactly what he deserved for his greed? Let us know your thoughts on this brilliant legal checkmate in the comments below. If you loved this story of ultimate revenge and silent strategy, hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a massive plot twist, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life drama